Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, something a little different for a Friday. A lot of the world all this week has been sort of obsessed with the rescue efforts for the submersible that went missing on its descent to the Titanic shipwreck. It's all really sad. And a big part of the problem was how this sub and others like it communicate with would-be supporters above water. And it turns out a professor here in Pittsburgh has been working on a way to solve that. And he's tested it from the ocean floor. Almost exactly a year ago, CMU's Dr. Alex Weibel was on that exact same submersible, now in pieces beside its destination, the Titanic. A production note, we spoke to Dr. Weibel just before the news broke that the sub had been found. It's Friday, June 23rd. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. What has it been like for you this week? You were on this exact same sub. How are you feeling?
Well, it's of course terrible news. And so you're trying to do your job while you're in your mind, you're worrying about your friends. And it stands to reason that something terrible must have happened.
Did it feel unsafe to you when you tested your technology there last year?
Well, it's clear that it's riskier than watching TV in the afternoon, right? So, but it is on the other side, they have put a lot of thought in it, in my opinion. There was thoughtful design that went into it. That the boat has redundancies. If something bad were to happen, they have three different ways of floating it again so that it naturally rises to the surface again. On the other side, it is novel technology. It's on carbon fibers, the hull of the boat. And this was pressure tested by NASA. But it is novel technology on a submarine. Usually they have been built by steel or titanium. And this time they built it with carbon fiber. And they have actually also sensors to test that the fibers are in good shape. I mean, it is a amazingly challenging task to go to 13,000 feet depth and have 400 times the pressure on the surface push on a submarine.
Yeah.
And then also it's not like you have a lifeboat that you can climb into down there. So the options are limited inherently in doing an expedition like this.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like so many of us have been absorbing the news, and when something does go wrong, I know we don't know exactly what it was that happened, but there's a lot of criticism of design, of technologies, of any safeguards that maybe weren't chosen. How does all of that hit you, both, your work as a researcher and also someone who's been a passenger?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit annoying because, all kinds of armchair warriors then, know everything better after the fact, right? Why haven't they spoken up? These expeditions were done for 2-3 years or several years already, all successful, and then everyone is happy. But now, of course, that something happens.
So you didn't feel in the moment like you were risking your life to do this?
Well, everyone is aware of the risks, and you sign waivers, of course. And
I heard someone say that death is mentioned 3 times on the first page of the waiver.
Of course, but on your airline flight, it says that probably.
I know.
In the fine print, and any such activity, you go bungee jumping or you go in a cruise ship or something, all of this will be said as well. But of course, everyone also understands that the risks are higher here for the reasons I mentioned. You're in the middle of the ocean. Your backup options are much more limited. Before I went, my sister asked me, is there a second ship that could, bring you up if something goes wrong? And I said, no, not at that depth, right? And you basically have to accept those risks if you go on an expedition like this. It's nature of the beast. Now, people ask, why do you do stuff like that, And the answer is really, do people have a death wish? It's something like this. It's not the case. The people who are either engaging in research like this or do this as explorers generally are actually the opposite. They tend to be entrepreneurs. They tend to be actually people who enjoy life more like anyone else, and they're just so anxious to learn things about the world and experience the utter limits of our planet that they're actually more the joyful kind and not a gloomy type, right?
And I'm betting they're much more resourced and wealthy than a lot of us do. So, you've made the decision to go. How did you feel when you took off?
I did not experience it as apprehension or fear at that moment. You have made that decision already, right? And now you're inside, and it's more the anticipation, the adrenaline, the excitement of doing this. And so people go on this journey. Now, it's of course not for the faint of heart and claustrophobic people, all.
It looks
Uh,
so small in
yeah,
photos. Did it feel that way in the moment?
yeah, it is. But you have five people sitting essentially on the floor of this boat. It's not like an MRI machine, I find MRI machines claustrophobic, but this is more like a minivan. Yeah, you sit in a minivan, and it's like an elevator. It goes down, and then during the ride down, you listen to music and you tell stories, and you chat with your fellow participants. And then when it gets close to the ocean floor, then obviously everyone tenses up, and but mostly in excitement. We're approaching the legendary wreck, and you get closer to it. And inside, people take pictures. Of course, there's a small porthole in the front, so you can peek out and see the ship. We were at the stern of the ship, which, if you have seen these graphic animations of the Titanic sinking, the ship broke apart and the front went like a torpedo forward, and is fairly well still in shape, while the tail broke off and essentially spiraled down. And during the spiral down, all the kinds of sides blew off and ripped off, so that at the bottom there's this debris field of many different metal pieces that are on the floor. So when you're in a submarine down there, it's actually dangerous because the metal pieces people can get entangled and so on.
And you mentioned that happened to this crew one other time before.
Not to that submarine, but it was a different submarine
Okay.
where they got stuck under the propeller of the Titanic. And
Oh, that sounds horrific.
yes, and in fact, I watched an interview of one of the participants in that, actually a journalist, and he says he was terrified.
Hey, Megan Harris here with a reminder that this show you're listening to reaches Pittsburgh's most passionate audience. CityCast Pittsburgh reaches the people who want to live here, not just the people who happen to live here. They're the movers and shakers and the most engaged in Pittsburgh life. CityCast Pittsburgh listeners are always looking for new restaurants and local events, and they really care about what's happening in their community. Get your message out to the city's best audience right now with an ad right here on the CityCast Pittsburgh podcast. Learn more at pittsburgh.citycast.fm/advertise or email us at ads@citycast.fm. Well, so, you went on your trip not just for pleasure, for work. I feel like such a big part of this conversation has been the lack of communication that these folks have with folks on the surface. Can you explain a little bit about the challenge of getting a message from 13,000 feet below to the surface, and what you were trying to do with your research for CMU and others?
Yeah, and that's what combines my work with this challenge of going in such a deep dive, because communication under the water is problematic. You can't send a radio signal because of the salt water, and that means everything has to go by sonar. The sonar is very low bandwidth, so most of the time, what people do is then send text messages. So in the submarine, there was no audio communication possible to the surface. You have to send them text messages, right?
It's wild to me that a text message will send from that depth. How does that work?
through sonar, they convert that into acoustic signal, basically, since it's not transmitted by radio. It's essentially like a sonar blip that you're sending, a sonar acoustic signal. And since water does transmit audio sounds well, it's a sonar signal that goes to the surface, but it's very low bandwidth, so you can only send character messages, text messages effectively. And that's what they normally do. So they send, oh, we are now here, we're at that depth. And then the surface responds back and said, because they know the GPS positions, so they can actually send back the position of the sub to the sub and then essentially communicate that way.
And that's what went wrong with this, is that those texts no longer went through?
Yeah, they suddenly stopped getting communication, but that could mean anything. It could have meant that their communication equipment failed. It could have meant that all electric failed on board. It could have meant that the sub imploded, right? It could mean many things.
Yeah. Well, so you were testing your technology. Can you explain it as simply as you're able?
So we have been working for many decades on this problem of translating spoken language, right? To try to build systems that allow you to do automatic simultaneous interpretation in other languages, right? So that if I were to speak German to you, you would get subtitles in English and vice versa. Now, our latest version of that system is we can also do dubbing, meaning we can take the video of a person, translate what they say into the other language, and then resynthesize the audio of what they said in the other language, but with their voice. And then we create a video where it's moving lip synchronously. So I could make a video of you speaking or Japanese, and you wouldn't know the difference because the lips move in Japanese and the voice sounds like you, but the output is Japanese speech, right? So we've developed this and came out with this in 21 as a first demonstration. And so when I met in Seattle the CEO of OceanGate, they explained this problem with communication to me. And I said, well, we can actually build a system that would get you a video conference from below just by recognizing the speech at the bottom, turning it into text, sending it via text message to the surface. And at the surface, we can reconstruct a video of me and Stockton Rush saying whatever we are saying at the ocean floor. And so we built that, we tested it, we made it smaller so that it would run on a laptop we could go put on board of the submarine. And so we went and tested it last summer. And that's how I got to ride down to the Titanic and have this amazing experience, but at the same time also test this technology.
You mentioned Stockton Rush. That's the CEO of OceanGate, who owns this submersible that's missing. How did you get linked up with he and OceanGate and talk to them about what they were using at the time and how to test your own system?
Yeah. So since we're living in Seattle for private reasons, I mean, I'm Carnegie Mellon professor and also professor in Germany, but family-wise, we actually live in Seattle. And so when I was at home, I was curious about the Titanic, and then I found out there's this company that they were in Seattle in Everett, right around the corner. So I decided to give them to visit them, and this is where I learned this communication problem that submarines have. And so we were thinking about it, saying, hey, how's about we actually try out a new technology that could potentially make that simpler. And so I befriended their team and their technical team. And then we spent a half year designing and building that system and collecting data in a smaller submarine and putting it all together for a mission in the summer.
I guess I had the impression, as so often is the case, that maybe this technology was developed in isolation and then you found an application. This is the reverse. You found this company, figured out a challenge they had, and made the technology for them.
Yes, of course. We've been working for a long time on the components, speech recognition, machine translation.
Yeah, of course.
Narration and so on. But this particular combination of components we had never really considered, because in our normal projects we're translating between languages. In this case, the problem isn't translation, it's transmission, right? And
Okay.
so we applied that to this problem.
So your technology did not get picked up and adapted for that in regular use?
The thing is, you're in a such stressful and high risk situation, as we clearly know. So you don't want to somehow replace your trusted text system. So as a default, they continued with the text messaging that they've done all along, right? And so we just got to try it out once, but it wasn't really. It's not a product, right? It's not something that we could now routinely put in, and that would have taken really a lot more substantial testing and routine experiments, etc., because you're putting this in a very high risk environment. So you don't do that lightheartedly.
Yeah. Do you wish that they had your technology now? Would it have made a difference? Could it?
Yeah, that's the big question. Of course, if they had a real problem with the sub, it would, I don't know, maybe it would have allowed to get at least a quick last message through. Not sure. If it's just a communication equipment and explaining what happened, maybe it would have helped. If it's electric that totally failed, then it's depending on the same transmission lines, right? So it might not have helped in that case.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you do have to have a working submarine, and you still do have to have electric and so forth, right? And
Yeah.
so perhaps it would have helped, but by and large, I think I fear that the problem was a different one.
Yeah. And I know you said that a couple of these folks were friends of yours. Have you been able to be in touch with families or, colleagues or anything like that?
The two people that I know personally is the CEO himself, who's been driving the submarine. So he is on board of that submarine, of this dive. And I have gotten to know him and his wife, and they had in fact invited me again to join a upcoming dive in the winter, to again make further progress with our communication device, and so it's just horrible to think about all of this taking this turn. The other gentleman is a wonderful expert on Titanic, Mr. P.H. Nojolet, Pierre-Henri, a Frenchman who has done 35 dives to the Titanic already. So he's a very seasoned hand at this. He knows every crook, nook, and cranny there of the Titanic, and is extremely expert on it and can explain it. He's also a submarine pilot. So in one of the missions, he was actually moving the submarine gingerly around the bow, the famous where all the Leonardo DiCaprio corner of the
Of
ship
course.
up
Yeah.
in the front. So he's on that too, and again, still hope for a miracle, I say, but at this point it looks grim,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, Dr. Eibel, I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and knowledge about this technology and also this experience with us. We're very grateful.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Some more news before you go. The Smithfield Street shelter downtown is officially closed. New temporary housing called Community Place is opening in Homewood, but unlike the Smithfield one, it's more like transitional housing than a real congregant spot. And all the other shelters are at capacity. Public Source has a great piece about the 5-hour-long back and forth that County Council had with advocates last week. And the one big takeaway seems to be that downtown is going to need a lot more public restrooms this summer. There's also now a motion urging the county executive to look into using the old VA hospital in Highland Park as a temporary or permanent shelter. And we'll leave you with some good news. It's berry picking season in Pittsburgh. You can snag your own strawberries, flowers, and lavender at Triple B Farms in Monongahela, and starting today, blueberries too. They're $18 per basket, which holds about 2 quarts. And for more fun, you can head out to Freedom Farms in Butler for their berry festival tomorrow and Sunday. That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. Our music is by Benji. Mallory Falk is the lead producer. Francesca DeBecco writes our newsletter, and Maria Carter is our audio producer. I'm your host, Megan Harris. We'll be back on Monday with more news from around the city. Talk to you soon. We'll tell CityCast that they need to upgrade our Zoom account.
Yeah.